Hello, my name is Levi Coffin. I was born on a farm near New Garden in Guilford County, North Carolina on October 28, 1798. My parents are Mary and Levi Coffin Sr. I am the only son and I have 6 sisters. My grandfather moved to North Carolina from Nantucket in 1740, where he farmed with many other Quakers. My family was influenced by the teachings of John Woolman, who believed that slaveholding was wrong and should be illegal. My parents met at an anti-slaveholding meeting, along with other Quaker families. My cousin was one of the earliest Quakers to help slaves escape North Carolina in the 1800s. As a child, I had little to no formal education at all, and I encountered many slaves, and often I found myself feeling sorry for them. I became an abolitionist at the age of 7 when I met a slave who had been bound by chains, and I asked him why they had him chained up, and he told me it was to prevent him from returning to his wife and children. Afterwards, I started helping my father by providing food for the slaves when they were hiding. Shortly after the FSA, Fugitive Slave Act, had become more aggressive with their enforcement, my family had become more secretive with our business and started working to help slaves mainly at night. Despite our limited hours, we started to be more and more successful. In 1822, I moved to India for a year before returning to the United States after deciding that Quakers and slavery could not coexist. On October 28, 1824, I married my wife, Catherine White, the sister of my brother-in-law, in the Hopewell Friends Meeting House in North Carolina. I was supposed to move to Indiana, but the plan was postponed after I figured out I was having my first son of 6 children. He was born in 1825. We moved to Indiana later that year. In my Newport, Indiana home, I would light a lantern in the window at night, which served as a signal for the slaves to come over. Before they came, they would usually hide out in the nearby forest. The slaves had a reserved room under the staircase that they would enter through a small garret that was usually covered by a bed to be hidden, and when the slave hunters came, they would look into the attic, but there was no one to be found. I made it known to the slaves in the community that I was willing to help and protect them. The first slaves that I took into my house were around the winter of 1826 and 1827. Some slaves were hesitant to take my help in escaping, but after witnessing the success, they joined. On average, around 100 slaves escaped per year. With my help, my home had become a converging point for the Madison, New Albany, and Cincinnati escape routes. Some refer to my home as the ground central station of the Underground Railroad. From many slave hunters and slave owners, I received verbal and written death threats, and as a result, my friends tried to tell me to stop helping the slaves. To them, I replied. After listening quietly to these counselors, I told them that I felt no condemnation for anything that I have ever done to help the fugitive slaves. If by doing my duty and endeavoring to the full injunctions of the Bible, I injure my business, then let my business go. As to my safety, my life was in the hands of my divine master, and I felt that I had his approval. I had no fear of the danger that seemed to threaten my life or my business. I was faithful to the duty and honest and industrious. I felt that I would be preserved and that I could make enough to support my family. In 1847, I moved to Ohio. I rented out my Newport business before leaving and made arrangements for my home in Indiana to keep serving as an Underground Railroad stop. Before I moved to Cincinnati, there was already a pretty big anti-slave movement going on, so I had no problem fitting in with the others. I moved around many times in the city of Cincinnati until I finally ended up on Wehrman Street in that large home with many rooms that I used to provide space for incoming slaves to rest and prepare for escape. As the American Civil War had approached, my role as an abolitionist had changed. I was now helping the wounded soldiers during the war. As a Quaker, I did not believe in war, but I participated for the greater good. My role in the war helped me establish the Englishmen's Freedmen's Aid Society. After the war was settled, I spent my final year writing a book recalling my life experiences with the Underground Railroad and as an abolitionist called The Reminiscences of Levi Coffin that was published in 1876. I died on September 16, 1827 around 2:30 p.m. in my home. My funeral service was held at Friends Meeting House of Cincinnati. As reported by the Daily Gazette, the crowd was so large that hundreds of people had to stand outside. My grave was an unmarked one. On July 11, 1982, a group of African Americans in Cincinnati mounted a 6-foot-tall monument over my grave in my honor.